That sounds good. Okay, so I've started to record, and anytime you want to proceed, yeah, that's good.
Perfect. I'm just going to have a quick look at the 11 participants. Excellent. Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent turnout. Great. Okay, let's get started. I will respect time. This tends to be a bit of a longer lecture, and I keep adding because the world is so fascinating. And I've been teaching for 11 years now. So I will respect time. Wherever we end up at 3:20 is where we'll stop off. And if there's anything to continue on, we'll pick up next time. You will get me for 4 sessions. I will introduce myself in a few slides time. But before we do any of that, let's start off with a little bit of a thought experiment. So it is the year 2050. In previous years, this has been 2020, but we've actually reached that landmark. So it's the year 2050. You are a student, your name is Billy, you have a day off school. So what you do, kids of the age do, and you slip on your headset and play some video or VR games before you get to breakfast. And you start blasting bad guys. And you win the game, you get rid of all of the invaders. And what you've in fact done is while you were playing your video game, you've actually blasted all of the tumor cells in a cancer patient in your game called the Tumornator. So this is a hypothetical future-looking scenario, but the idea is to get your mind thinking about possibilities and asking those what if questions. So welcome everyone. My name is Dr. Shawna Pandya. I am one of your sessional instructors. Today's lecture is called Engineering Tomorrow, Fostering a Culture of Disruption and Innovation. Our learning objectives are the what, why, and how of innovation. So I want you firstly to understand what exactly innovation is, as well as the emerging trends and technologies that will impact the future, specifically as it pertains to technology and medicine, but really it's all intertwined. So we're going to talk about a big picture context. Tell you the why it's important in the current global context, although I'm pretty sure this being the second year of virtual teaching, 4th session, I think, in a pandemic, I don't really need to convince you. And then talking about the how, talking about tools and mindsets to apply that innovation mindset. So by the end of this lecture today, I want you to be able to answer 3 key questions. Firstly, what is innovation? Why does it matter? And then how does one innovate? So this will be a fully interactive class, whether you feel most comfortable unmuting and yelling out answers or putting out responses in the chat. I'll be monitoring that as well. So here's your first question. What is this? Not a trick question, by the way.
A bottle of soda?
Yeah, exactly. It's a bottle. And I see the chat is lighting up. Yep. Everything from pop bottles, soda, Mountain Dew. Excellent. Okay. All right. So here is the next question. What can you do with a bottle?
Recycle it.
You can recycle it. Yeah, for sure. What else can you do?
Is it a storage?
Storage. Yeah. Drink from it, fill it with liquid, store things. Yeah. Keep them coming. Get a few more answers here. All right, so you can use it for a lot of things, it turns out. So you can use it as a soil and a planter for plants. You can make a chandelier. You can feed the local wildlife, store jewelry, make pencil cases, make another chandelier art installation, or use it as a piggyback. In fact, you can choose to re-engineer the bottle altogether. And so this is something when I first started teaching this class that I referred to as the Heinz ketchup problem. And so you can, rather than reimagining the uses for a bottle, reimagine the design of a bottle. So, there's those classic Heinz commercials, you're putting the bottle upside down, you're trying to get all of the product out. And so it's a marketing gimmick for Heinz, but it also points out to the inherent wastefulness of a product by its very design won't let you access all of the product. And so if you think about all those milliliters or cc's of product, whether it's a shampoo bottle, ketchup bottle, that are left in the Heinz ketchup bottle, the shampoo bottle, over millions of bottles per year in all those landfills. That's actually a lot of waste. So then what if we had a different type of design? So this is out of MIT Media Lab, a bit of an older video now, but someone did exactly that and said, what if this is the traditional ketchup bottle, has high surface ketchup to bottle surface adhesion, so you're actually wasting a bit of product. What if you change those surface tension properties so that there was a lot less adhesion between the bottle surface as well as the ketchup bottle? And now look, how much of that use of the product in the bottle you can actually get access to. So this is what I mean when I talk about thinking differently and asking those what if questions. So let's do a little bit of introductions now. I promised you I'd tell you more about myself. So my name is Dr. Shawna. Oh, gosh.
Hi, it's Prab, and I'm a Walmart pharmacist. Flu season is upon us, and we're making it easy for you to get a flu shot at Walmart pharmacies across the country. Book your flu shot today at Walmart.
That's from 1 second. Okay, solve the problem. Technology is the future as well as a hindrance, is what I've learned in my experience. Okay, back to the slideshow. So I was just introducing myself. So like I was saying, my name is Dr. Shawna Pandya. I'm a physician in general practice, rural emergency medicine, women's health. I am a scientist astronaut candidate program graduate with the International Institute for Astronautical Sciences. I run their space medicine group. I run the space life sciences team with the Association of Space Professionals, VP of Immersive Medicine with Luxonic Technologies, which will be relevant in a few classes' time as we talk about immersive medicine, VR, AR, as well as the Director of Medical Research for Orbital Assembly Corporation. A lot of this is space medicine. It'll make more sense next class, I promise. Explorer Aquanaut, and I will stop there because I want to know more about your background. And so feel free to unmute yourselves. Feel free to tell me who you are in 2 lines, what you study, what you hope to get out of this class. Or if you prefer to not unmute, you can certainly type it in the chat. So we'll just give you a couple minutes to tell me who you are. And let's see, who do we have here? Maybe I'll just go down the list. So Andrew Archibald.
So he's here.
May have stepped away.
He typed in the chat.
Oh, he did. Okay, thank you.
He's
First year
in the
medical student.
library.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yep, I understand. Don't want to disrupt others in the library. All right, Chun Jiao. Hopefully I'm saying your name right. Apologies if I'm not.
Hello, yes. My name is Chun. I am in the 3rd year of biochemistry. Yeah.
Welcome. Devin with 1 name. You may have a last name, I don't know.
Devin, he's here.
Bioengineering grad student, undergrad. Some good disciplines here. Gaurav Adhikari.
Hi, I'm Gaurav. I'm a 2nd year medical student, and so far I've really liked the classes that I've taken here and just learning more about technology and AI. So those are my interests, and I guess that's why I'm here attending these classes.
Yeah, perfect. I'm glad to see that we're getting more medical students over the years. I know your schedules are packed, so thanks for joining. Leanne Ejak.
Hi there. So like Gaurav, I'm also a 2nd year med student.
Awesome, welcome. And for the med students out there, I'm curious, you can just type it in the chat. What are you interested in? What do you want to go into? If, 2nd year's pretty early, to be fair. Matthew Pletz.
Hey, I'm a graduate student in biomedical engineering, and so I'm
Awesome.
most interested in medicine and the future of medicine.
Great. Samity.
Hello, I'm a fourth year computing science student, interested in games and AI. That's where I'm trying to go in. I took this class on a whim, but also because it sounded interesting and I have no medical background, so this is very interesting. It's nice to see where everything is going and it's very inspiring. So yeah, I'm here. Ooh.
Awesome. Hopefully, that's great. Hopefully we'll live up to expectations. No pressure on us.
You already
Shawna,
have.
great.
My name's Sean. I'm a fifth-year cultural studies student, but I've always been kind of a big futurist, and I like to look into science and technology in my free time. So it's a little bit out of my field, but I'm very happy to be here and happy to learn.
Fantastic. Talani Brimmel.
I'm Talani. I'm in my third year of neuroscience right now, and I guess I just wanted to take this course because I thought it would be cool to get a wider perspective rather than the basic science courses that I take. So yeah.
I'm cheering a little bit here because I did a neuroscience undergrad. So that was what that was about, if you heard me say yes. Great. Have I missed anyone?
Just in the room here.
Oh, that's right.
My name's Imre. I'm also a third year neuroscience undergrad, so you're welcome. And yeah, I also just kind of wanted to get like a wider scope. I'm also looking to go into med, so I thought it'd be cool to have some of these ideas in my head going into that.
Perfect. Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for taking the time to introduce yourself. All right, so I promised you over the course of this hour, we were going to answer 3 key questions. So let's start with the first one. What is innovation? So if I were to ask you to define innovation, just in a few words in a sentence, what would you say? Right, seeing some answers in the chat. Creating new value. Yep, for sure. Any other examples?
Thinking outside the box, maybe.
Yep.
Taking novel solutions to existing issues.
Yeah, making something new, improvement. Yeah, exactly. And so what I'm getting at with this question is it's not something that's easily answerable and can have multiple answers. And so someone said building on previous solutions, adding value. So this is really dating myself here. I grew up in the era of Microsoft Windows 95. In fact, these slides need to be updated because last time I presented this, Windows 10 was around, but we're now at Windows 11. If the ads on TV are to be believed. Some of us grew up in the Walkman, Sony Discman era, then we had the iPod and then the iPhone and now iPads. So it's building on design solutions before. It's thinking out of the box. So what if you didn't have to choose between a car or an airplane? Well, there's companies like Aeromobile and Terrafugia who are building prototypes around that. What if you took inspiration from science fiction? So this is the world's first hoverboard being demoed by none other than Buzz Aldrin at Autodesk circa 2015. Back to the Future inspired. And then it's also looking at emerging technologies to do exactly that, create value amongst multiple sectors. So looking specifically at drone delivery for food, for fun, for photography, and for package delivery, which Amazon is pretty big on. It's thinking about things that you may just ask why and say, what was the need for that? But hey, that's pretty cool. Like having furniture that senses that you need to put your feet up. This is from the Stanford School of Design. And again, elsewhere in the realm of emerging technologies, 3D printing, additive manufacturing. So again, here's these questions, someone saying, maybe it's not needed, but what if I did this anyways? In this particular image, someone has taken 3D printing to make art, but what they did was they computer modeled the particles of someone's sneeze. This was in the pre-COVID era. And then they took that particulate matter as it was flying through the air, modeled that, entered that into the 3D printer, and voila, created a sneeze vase. You can use 3D printing for food, so you can have your face and eat it too. 3D printing for a bioreactor. To be able to print cells, 3D printing for space, where we're resource limited, and we're going to talk all about that next time. And 3D printing for good, like this little turtle here who had pyramidalism and was given a 3D printed prosthesis so he can go about living his best turtle life. The next image is a bit graphic, so brace yourself if you're a bit squeamish, but it's also thinking about novel solutions to ongoing problems. So this is in fact a hand grafted onto a foot. This was in a 2015, a Chinese factory worker had his hand severed in an industrial accident. And what they did was they were able to preserve the hand while they allowed the stump to heal from the trauma. They grafted it onto the foot to maintain blood flow, and then they regrafted it on back to the hand. So it's, you know, the bottom line here is that innovation is about thinking outside the box, about building on new ideas, about thinking of novel solutions, but also asking, hey, I wonder what happens if I do this. And so it's applicable to all sectors. Here is in the materials science sector. Here's an example of a new material. Oil spills, super result of materials science and manufacturing. It's also looking at exploration and going to new locales with new access. So this year particularly is exciting for human spaceflight. It is the year of commercial space. So in July this year alone, Virgin Galactic with Richard Branson, Blue Origin with Jeff Bezos, each took commercial suborbital flights to space with civilian crews. Just last month, Inspiration 4 and the first all-civilian crew took an orbital flight and actually going orbiting higher than any crew has been since the Apollo era. So you can see, in fact, the second lady from the left is my good friend, Diane Proctor. So it's also a whole new era for access to space. And so just to kind of condense to you how rapidly the world is changing, I just want to share with you some headlines from this week alone. So this week we've seen US surgeons transplant not a human kidney grown in a pig and transplanted to a human, but a pig grown in a pig kidney transplanted in a human. This is really relevant because the US transplant waiting for kidneys is on the order of hundreds of thousands. Elsewhere in the social media world, there's a lot of interest in the metaverse, creating this virtual parallel world in which we can interact and live as our avatars and do so for games, for social connections, for work. And in fact, the latest news just hot off the press a few hours before today's lecture is that Facebook, who's taken a really big interest in this, has rebranded themselves as Meta. And coming back to this principle of flying cars and drones, there's in fact startups trying to build worldwide infrastructure for flying taxi services. This particular company, Joby Aviation, is in talks to create over 500 taxi ports, skyports around the world in major cities, repurposing the tops of parkades, for example, as landing sites. Hoping to pilot, if you'll forgive the pun, as early as 2023. So this is your crash course into innovation, but let's dig deeper into this, because remember, I want you to be able to apply principles of innovation to your own careers and trajectories. So let's now talk about operating frameworks into which we're constrained. And so this is a technology and the future of medicine course. And so let's talk about frameworks in which we need to operate in the context of medicine. So let's start with the definition of health. This is the World Health definition of what health is. And so when most of us think about health, it's simply, not getting sick or curing sickness. But it's in fact a lot more holistic than that. Health is the state of complete physical, mental, social, and I would add sexual well-being. That's not merely the absence of disease or infirmity, because oftentimes by the time we're treating something, it's too late when prevention and preventative medicine would have done. There's also the NIH model, the National Institute for Health, the 5 Ps, so predictive, personalized, precise, preventative, participatory, and bonus point of care medicine. So that means, why are we giving everyone 81 milligrams of baby aspirin for preventative care when some people, based on their genetics, may need 27 milligrams, and some people may need, double that or triple that amount. And so that's a hypothetical, but we know, for example, with warfarin, an older blood thinner, that, the dosing varies wildly based on a patient's genetics. Point of care testing. So like I said, I'm an emergency physician. I do a lot of rural healthcare. It's oftentimes don't have access to the tests and the imaging we would have at a major tertiary center like the university hospital. And so what if we could have point of care testing where we simply took a on the spot blood test and we're able to achieve results. And so we're seeing that a little bit with portable machines like iStat, but it's just the beginning for getting access to healthcare. The med students in the audience, you guys will be very familiar, guys and gals, with this. This is the CanMed's Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons professional competencies. Basically, to be qualified as a physician in your chosen field, you need to meet the 6 CanMed's competencies for medical expert. Fun fact, they will ask you this in your medical interviews, sometimes for residency. So they want you to be a scholar. You need to know the academics, a professional, a communicator, a collaborator. Remember, you're working with nurses, other physicians, respiratory health, physical therapy. You need to be a leader, whether that's leading a code in a trauma situation to quality improvement initiatives in your clinic, as well as a health advocate for your patients, as well and vulnerable populations. On the technology side, there's the World Economic Forum Emerging Technology Framework. So looking at smart care and emerging technologies, universal care, care anywhere, intelligent health enterprises. So collaborative and complementary technologies like machine learning and AI, and empowered healthcare. So this is very analogous to the 6P model, 5P model of the NIH of participatory healthcare. 2 more frameworks that I want to bring to your attention, this being a Canadian class, the principles of the Canadian Healthcare Act. So publicly administered, accessible, universal, portable, comprehensive. And then finally, the pillars of medical ethics. So first thing at the very top is do no harm. So that's non-maleficence, and then beneficence, acting in the good of your patients, respecting their autonomy, and then acting justly, so justice. So that was the framework. So now let's talk about opportunities in problem spaces in medicine, and then also in the broader context of the world we live in, because it's all interconnected. And so the first example of that is going to be a surprise to no one. Challenges and opportunity. So COVID-19, and because it's been a while, 2021 and probably 22 at this rate, preventative healthcare. So we're seeing this, for example, with mass vaccine rollout, trying to prevent the occurrence of COVID-19 rather than dealing with the current ICU overburdening and healthcare brink of collapse that we're at in Alberta right now, as well as preventing the costs that come with dealing with long COVID. Monitoring, this is true for both COVID as well as chronic conditions like heart disease, diabetes. There's a long list, remote and rural care. I talked a little bit about that earlier, and I'm going to spend more time on it in the space medicine talk, so we'll glaze over that. Increasing antibiotic resistance, I have a slide on that, and then emerging technologies, accessibility, as well as drug specificity. So I talked a little bit about how one drug fits all isn't perhaps the best model. So let's talk a little bit more about some of these in detail. So antibiotic resistance, here's a quote from our friends at the World Health Organization. It is happening in every corner of the world and has the potential to affect anyone, anywhere, anytime, and it's a major threat to public health. So antibiotics are a godsend, first developed in the first part of the 20th century, increasing resistance to drugs first developed in the 1950s. On top of that, on the flip side of that, for various reasons, 50% of antibiotics are inappropriately prescribed. And so now what's terrifying is what were considered big gun antibiotics and kind of machine gun, broad spectrum antibiotics, highly expensive. When I was in training, like Pip-Taz, isn't always working. And so for a long time, we actually didn't have any breakthrough antibiotics. And then in 2015, we had the first ever breakthrough of tazobactam. And if I remember the details correctly, this was harvested from a mycoplasma species that was able to penetrate the cell wall. And the reason we weren't able to harvest it previously was we just didn't have the technology to grow this bacteria and extract the active molecule. Let's talk about drug repositioning. So we talked about how one drug will not be a cure-all, but what about older drugs being repurposed for additional usages? So early in the pandemic, you may have heard of specific classes of antihypertensive, blood pressure medications possibly having an effect for lung protection and COVID protection. That's pretty much been proven not to be the case now. But through computer modeling, Stanford and HP scientists have looked at the 3D configuration of medications as well as the receptors they paired with, and then have asked how can drugs be repurposed for new maladies? And so, for example, cimetidine, some of you may know one of its cousins, or its brand name as Zantac, used for over-the-counter as a heartburn medication, may have applications for lung cancer treatment. Topamax, used for migraines, used as seizure medication, may have implications for inflammatory bowel disease. And so this is kind of another example of innovation, not by creating necessarily a brand new drug, but by repurposing an older drug. We talked about personalization in the 5P model, 5 to 6P model of NIH healthcare. And so personalization. So if any of you have ever been in a cast, you know how awfully uncomfortable it is. You know how scratchy, how awful and smelly and wet that your cast gets. So what if we could make a cast that was more modeled to your hand, that could take into account the bumps and the over your wrist, your radial and ulnar styloids, that you could take off and wash and pop in the dishwasher. And then as a bonus, you could plug into ultrasound frequencies to promote bone healing, which in the early studies showed a 30% accelerated rate of bone healing. And so that's what some companies have done with 3D printed casts. And what they've done is they've been able to accommodate the individual variations in anatomy to have a more comfortable fitting cast. It's breathable, so you don't have that smell or that itch or that moisture buildup. And it also has a interface to plug into those ultrasound frequencies that we're talking about, and it's dishwasher safe, so you can have two pairs, one to swap out and wash when it gets too dirty or odorous. So coming back to personalization, here's an example coming out of Harvard Medical School and personalized genomics, taking the vast arrays of information that we get from looking at the human genome and putting it into a one-page summary for family doctors such as myself. We're able to say, okay, based on this disease profile, I can see that you are more or less sensitive or resistant to something like warfarin and would need to start at a higher dose, for example. Examples of emerging technologies. So this is a little bit dated now. This is machine learning and AI with Watson. Originally applied to healthcare solutions and diagnostics, famously won and then lost on Jeopardy after declaring Toronto as the capital of Canada. And then the other part of this is saying maybe we don't always need high-tech AI solutions for pattern recognition. And so one of my favorite studies, a bit older, from 2014 or 2015, that has also looked at alternatives to doing pathology diagnosis better, is a study in which pigeons were taught to recognize breast cancer pathology in path slides, and did so with a 98% accuracy rate. And when it was flock sourced and multiple pigeons were looking at slides, the accuracy increased even further. And so what they showed in this study is that pigeons may be adjuncts to pathologists. So Kim, I don't know if you're interested in having a pigeon in the lab. And so the way and so the way they trained them was through positive feedback. They would reward them with birdseed when they properly identified the breast cancer pathology. And so you know, maybe this tumor native scenario that we started off thinking, where a child fights off cancer cells, well, pigeons can do it. Maybe it's not so far off. And then finally, patient context. So this isn't novel, but it is critical. And so, for example, looking at patient context in new in a new light in the context of chronic disease. So for example, this one looked at the association between divorce and risks for myocardial infarct or heart attack. And so this study found, I believe it's at a Duke University, that divorce is a significant risk factor for heart attack, and more divorces, particularly in women, as well as were an increased risk factor. So before we move on from this section, we're going to talk about a summary slide of emerging trends. We've kind of alluded to most of these. We talked about 3D printing, big data, looking at metadata and being able to data mine and get new insights. Geolocation, for example, what happens when you pair Google search results with the geography from which they originated? And in previous studies, it's been a while now, so I may be getting the details wrong. They found that the Google search rate at particular times of year, I think out of Australia, for looking for people for solutions for leg cramps was higher. And so then this suggests, well, is there a seasonal component to this? And then if you're a scientist, you may say, well, why is there a seasonal component? Is it more sunlight? Is it less sunlight? So that's the kind of insights we can get from geotagging data insights. Smartphone apps. So I've started to prescribe apps like MyFitnessPal to patients looking to further track their weight loss and caloric intake, as well as activity levels, looking at trends like faster, better, cheaper, smaller. So for example, smartwatches are the perfect example of this in the context of monitoring. Nanomedicine is an extension of this. If you've ever looked at what our friends at DARPA, the Defense and Advanced Research Projects Agency, looks at, they've in the past proposed mechanoreceptors to act as respirocytes in soldiers of the future, so they can hold their breath underwater for hours at a time. We've talked about the machine learning impaired with the data mining. And then I'll only briefly mention virtual reality, augmented reality, and 360 video here, because we'll have a lecture dedicated to this in about a month's time. So let's just talk about the emerging crises and opportunities. So the big one, the one in the room we can't ignore, emerging crises and opportunities in 2021. So we've had to reimagine how we do a lot of things. And so social distancing, masking, reusable masks, having your own personal bubble as a mask, reimagining how we teach, how we learn, how we work. And so this is a crisis, but it's also an opportunity to reimagine how we are able to maintain our standard of education, standard of healthcare, without compromising when the global pandemic forces us to act a little bit differently. So I lied a little bit. I will be getting a little bit into AR and VR right now. And so I mentioned one of the hats I wear is as the VP of Immersive Medicine of Fluxonic Technologies, a Saskatoon-based firm focusing on immersive technologies. So that term encompasses AR, VR, and 360 video, also known as extended reality, for medical education. And so particularly in the pandemic, when we have lost access to our traditional physical learning spaces, whether it's a sim lab, whether it's on-site teaching, there's a huge role for VR. And so this is actually a snapshot from an austere environment underwater. I'll talk about the value of that next class. A lot of teasers here, but hopefully I'm just building up the incentive for you to come back. And I'll also show you the work that we've done with paramedics and healthcare practitioners to bring back those physical learning experiences. And so this is a class on healthcare and the future of medicine, but really it's all intertwined. So we can't ignore the health effects and strata associated with social determinants of health, with climate change, with social, with gender, with racial inequity. So we need to still take a look at the bigger picture and looking at some really scary facts. So climate change is obviously an obvious one, proceeding at a rate unprecedented in the past 1300 years. When we talk about social and migration concerns, there are more people enslaved at this time in history, 30 million people, than at any other time in history. There's more than 50 million refugees and migrants worldwide. The first time this number has been exceeded since the Second World War. On a bit more positive side, exploration. we really need to, we haven't been back to the moon in nearly 60 years. And we've only mapped 5% of our oceans to date. So there is, hopefully this has laid the case for there is some work to do. There is a case for innovation. There's multiple ways to think about innovation. So now let's spend the last part of this talk talking about the pathways towards innovation. So how do we get from here to there? So there's a lot of different ways to frame this. For those of you who read the Harvard Business Review, they have a new article every month. So this is simply one framework to keep in mind. So I like to frame it short and sweet. Four avenues: people, mindset, environment, experience. I have an entire TED talk dedicated to this called "Everything I Thought About Innovation Was Wrong." So I've included the link here if you're interested in pursuing this, more for your interest for anything else. This is my first talk in a TED Talk in 2010. We're not going to play it, I said. Okay, so let's get to the first. Let's talk about people. And so when we talk about fostering innovation, well, how do we do that? So one of the first rules is fostering cross-disciplinary collaboration and building on each other's ideas. And about 2 classes from now, we're actually going to put that into practice through a series of workshops where you do all the work and I simply give you the rules in the framework in which you're operating. And so basically, I often say that you don't need to be a brain surgeon and a rocket scientist, because your whole job when you're functioning as a team is to act as a jigsaw puzzle and how you fit together to form a bigger picture. And this class is a perfect example of that, because you have all disciplines represented. We have a lot of STEM representation here: comp sci, engineering, medicine. And in previous classes, we've also had some of the arts represented as well. And then the other part of this is a little bit of a plug on leadership and teamwork, is viewing teamwork as well as leadership as a mortar between the bricks model. And so what do I mean by that? In that when you look at a brick wall, the strength doesn't come from the bricks, although it's easy to think so. Because if you didn't have the mortar holding that team together, there would be no strength to those bricks. It would simply fall down. And so when you're talking about working in teams, it's all about building those connections. Especially if you're a leader, looking for those gaps to fill in and then building a bigger piece, a bigger wall, a bigger jigsaw puzzle together. The next thing I want to talk about is mindset. So this one is where we kind of get into things you can start applying right after this class. So the first one is question everything. So what do I mean by that? What are specific questions you can ask? So it's simple, and we're gonna, for homework, I'm going to give you specific exercises you can do between now and the next class. So first of all, how can this be better? How can I make this better with the skill set that I have? And here's an example of someone who did that. So this is Anya Polgarian. She was a teenager when she was volunteering in the hospital and saying, well, look at dialysis machines. They're the size of refrigerators and they're tens of thousands of dollars, which doesn't work if you're in the States and have poor healthcare coverage, if you're in a disaster zone, or if you just don't have the mobility to come into a hospital for dialysis, and you have transportation issues. And so she re-engineered a dialysis machine the size of a suitcase that can be operated anywhere for an order of magnitude less. The other question that I encourage you to ask, and hopefully that you've been starting to think about already through some of the examples that we've discussed, is asking those what if questions. And so what if, COVID didn't exist? And then engineering backwards, well, what would the world look like? How would we get rid of it? What if we were holding this class virtually, but in the metaverse? What would that look like? How would that enhance interaction? And so again, another shameless plug, here is my most recent, my 3rd TED Talk. On discovering exploration and the value of exploration, the why, and how the implications of asking those what if questions. So again, the link is there for you in the slides. And just to bring it home to a practical example. So the med students, I know you've gone through your III. So does anyone here recognize this guy? Feel free to yell it out or type it in the chat. So this is Ignaz Semmelweis, 19th century. He was a physician, and he asked a crazy but not at all high-tech question. He said, what if we did something insane, like instead of when physicians walked out of the morgue dealing with patients who died of infectious disease to attend to postpartum patients or mothers during delivery, what if we did something crazy? And what if we washed our hands? Which we do like crazy in the era of COVID, but at the time he was ridiculed, and he actually sadly ended his days in a mental asylum because of his radical idea. And you know, his end of days quote in 1865 was, "When I look back upon the past, I can only dispel the sadness which falls upon me by gazing into that happy future when the infection will be banished. That conviction that such a time must inevitably sooner or later arrive will cheer my dying hour." So hopefully if he were alive today, he would, you know, be happy to see the value of having a simple intervention like hand washing. And in fact, one silver lining of COVID, despite many dark clouds, is that of the 4 major types of flus seen on Earth with social distancing, masking, and hand washing, one of them has not been reported since March of last year. So infection control, as it turns out, is important. Who knew? All right, so then let's talk about mindsets that we can use. So let's talk about disruption and exponential thinking now. So learning to anticipate, learning to think exponentially, and then putting those two ideas together. So what do we mean by exponential thinking? So let's engage in another thought experiment, if you will. So when we talk about geometric versus arithmetic progressions in math, and so when we talk about linear progressions, say you're running on a treadmill, you're going to increase in a linear fashion. So you're going to, at minute 1, you're going to go at 1 kilometer per hour, super slow. Minute 2, 2 kilometers per hour. And with every minute, you're going to increase. And so you're increasing at a very slow rate, very, very manageable. By the time you're at minute 15, you're at 15 kilometers an hour, pretty fast, but it's been manageable up until that point. So now if we increase in a geometric fashion, in an exponential fashion, we're actually doubling the rate at which we walk / run / sprint on this treadmill very, very rapidly. So at minute 1, we're walking at 1 kilometer, minute 2, we're 2 kilometers, then 4, then 8, then 16, then 32. And then, you know, by the time you hit minute 6, you're falling off the treadmill and are, you know, plastered against the back wall. And so that's what we mean by exponential thinking, is growing the rate in a curvilinear fashion at which we're applying, whether we're talking about technologies or computer chips, or even media technology. So here's a practical example. So how long did it take the radio to reach 50 million people? Any guesses out there? So 38 years for the radio to reach 50 million people. By contrast, with social media, it took Facebook 2 years. The latest Adele video, which I still haven't seen, but I hear is good, took 2 days. So this is the rate of exponential change and growth and in the commercial media. So now let's take that exponential thinking and talk about how we can apply that for disruption. So here's a very real example. So once upon a time, maybe I'm dating myself, some of you may not remember this, to buy a book, you simply went to the bookstore. That was the only way to do it, and it would be the local bookstore. And then someone came along and said, well, what happens if you had bigger bookstores with greater inventory? And that's when the Chapters and the Indigos and the Barnes and Nobles came around. And then Amazon said, well, yeah, that's all well and good, but you can't possibly house all of those books in one big box bookstore. So what if you had a warehouse where that was a central repository where you could send them out to multiple locations? And thus was born the Amazon warehouse. And so Amazon, actually looking at these exponential trends, said, well, how can we be our own disruptive force? What if we got rid of physical containment and shipping and storage centers altogether? And thus was born the Kindle. And so then let's look at the flip side. Let's look at a not so success story. What happens when you fail to recognize disruption? So again, dating myself a little bit, Blockbuster Video. There was a time that when we were to watch a movie, your options were to either watch it when it came out to the cinema, or you would go on a Friday night to the local rental store and then rent to video, you would have to a video or later on a DVD, and then you have to return it. And then Netflix said, well, again, physical spaces seem kind of wasteful. So what if you could just have a DVD by mail order? And then as the power of internet as well as streaming services became a thing, Netflix said, well, why even have a physical copy of a movie via disc at all? Why not just have a streaming service? And so in this case, Netflix disrupted itself while Blockbuster failed to see that trend and is relegated to a sole Twitter account with the last remaining Blockbuster. So the other way to think about disruption is asking yourself, well, what if? This is a newspaper article from a few years ago. It's about 8 years old now, but it's quite an example of thought experimentation of how different is the world we live in now versus the world 35 years ago. And so this is a company out of Guelph, Ontario, sorry, a family out of Guelph, Ontario that noticed their 2-year-old and their 4-year-old were just ensconced in their iPads all the time, that they wouldn't look up. And so one day they had it and they said, you know what, we're only going to grow up with the technologies we had in the 80s. So this meant never using anything other than a paper map for GPS, refusing to look at newborn photos of nieces and nephews unless it was a printed photo, no digital photos, nothing beyond an Atari game system, microwave, and fax machine, no email. And so it was really a good lesson in it's only 30 years apart. The world we're living in is a vastly, vastly different one in which we live today. So let's do a couple of thought experiments now. I've been talking for a while, so I will turn it over to you, and we're going to make this next set of slides a little bit more interactive. So I hope to prove to you that the world is changing at a rapid exponential pace, and that it's only getting faster and faster, this treadmill, this technological treadmill that we're on. So I'm going to ask you now to name me jobs that did not exist 10 years ago. So either by unmuting, typing it in the chat, go ahead and tell me what's changed about the world. I'll turn it over to the chat. Hopefully you're still all with me, no one's asleep. So we'll go to the next slide, but keep in mind that there's a few more questions coming towards you. So be ready to offer your answers. So app developers. So app development only became really big. So this is specific to smartphones with the advent of the iPhone and later the Android systems. Data miners, we wouldn't really have the capacity for big data mining. Big data analysts, millennial generational experts. I still don't know what that is, but millennials weren't a force to reckon with 10 years ago. Social media managers, in fact, when Facebook and Twitter first came around, there was questions about the longevity. There was questions about, what is the value of a social media manager? And now we know that there's actual science about the insights, impressions, engagements, how long you spend on something, how you get people to engage. It's an entire science. Cloud computing service providers, digital marketing managers, SEO, search engine optimization specialists, these are design experts, and sustainability managers. And my personal favorite, the Zumba instructor. So Zumba in 2008, 16 centers, fitness centers, 6,000 plus, 404-fold growth in 5 years. When the Zumba trend came around, and I wonder if Zumba is still around. I'd be curious to see what those are. Well, Wikipedia, I see that. So Wikipedia is, changing the way we, cite sources. So I'll give you, to get off topic, I'm seeing that someone's commenting Wikipedia in the chat. One of the world's largest space conferences is going on right now, and traditionally you have to submit a paper as well as a presentation. And when I first started going to this conference in 2007, the only way to cite sources was through your traditional academic papers, and they would provide the format of how they wanted it to be cited. In the latest version of the paper templates that they give you, they now have examples of how to cite sources from media sources, web pages, online articles, as well as academic papers. And so it's now just as legitimate to cite your digital online source, possibly even Wikipedia, as long as you've looked at the sources and the legitimacy of that article as academic papers. Okay, so next question coming your way. What are jobs that will not exist, that exist today that will not exist in 10 years' time? So we've just talked about jobs that are now in existence. What are jobs that will not exist in 10 years' time? Over to the chat. All right, some answers. Cashier, yes. Truck driver, yes. Taxi drivers, yep, we saw those. We're already seeing that with automated cars, autonomous vehicles. Yeah, those are all good ones. Yeah, all on my list as well. Okay, so retail cashier. Go ahead.
Customer servicing, like
Customers.
support people.
Yeah, and we're already seeing that with those online. As the second you get onto some sites, you see those, hi, can I help you today, automated chats. Okay, so retail cashier, we're seeing that with self-checkout already in Walmart and other big box stores. Telemarketers, for better or worse, have been replaced with automated robots. Delivery, so I put Kiva robots, we're also seeing Amazon for drone delivery. Newspaper delivery, I have not held a physical newspaper in a very long time. So digital news, travel agents are being disrupted by Travelocity, Kayak, Expedia, Hotwire. We talked about, someone mentioned taxi dispatchers. So Uber is investing heavily in autonomous vehicles. We talked about the flying taxis with Joby Aviation earlier. Even in medicine, transcriptionists are being replaced by voice recognition. That's already a thing today. Librarians have to contend with online search. And so what about social media managers? What's going to happen next? And, you know, it's very interesting to hear about what Facebook's doing with Meta, because I'm fairly certain they're already thinking about who is going to be the Meta media manager already. Okay, so then last question, second to last question. Jobs that will exist in 10 years that don't exist today. Ooh, translators, yeah, that's a good one. That's the more relevant to this slide. Servers are being replaced by robots, yeah. All right, jobs that do not yet exist today. Any takers? And this is purely imaginative. There are no wrong answers. I just want to hear where your minds are at.
People to fix all the machines that we're coming up with.
People to fix machines that we're coming up with?
Yeah, like all these things that are replacing our jobs, it's gonna be people to fix them.
Yeah, maintenance for new technologies. I see AI coordinators. Yeah, absolutely. Hyperloop workers, base janitor. That's so good. I love it. Yeah, and yeah, there's a lot of overlap, a little bit of overlap, I should say. So waste data managers. So I've heard this most brilliantly put in a talk by Vint Cerf, one of the architects of the internet, chief evangelist at Google. He talked about bit rot, and in the year 3000, how are we going to open PowerPoint from today when we have PowerPoint version 3000 or 3K? Healthcare navigators. So with the amount of data and guidelines and changes in medicine, we're seeing subspecialists and subspecialists. And so navigating the healthcare system from primary care to knowing what to ask the dietitian versus the occupational therapist, from personal experience being on the patient side with a family member, is becoming increasingly difficult, especially with our aging population, knowing that we are going to have a whole new generation of octogenarians to support will become increasingly relevant. Architects of augmented reality. So this used to be really feature thinking when I first started teaching the course. Now it's a reality. We can develop in codes like Unreal and Unity. Alternative currency bankers. And I'm laughing a little bit because once upon a time, these were really forward thinking, but we really truly live in the age of Bitcoin and Dogecoin. And what was the last one? Shiba Inu, Bitcoin, yeah, Shiba Inu cryptocurrency yesterday increased its value 60 million fold as of yesterday. So yeah, 60 million%, I should say. So hopefully you invested in that. 3D printing engineers, privacy managers. So it's really interesting looking at parents. So to give you a little bit of my experience with social media and the looking at my contemporaries and what they posted, it would be, hey, I graduated, and everyone would graduate at the same time, and then hey, I got engaged, and hey, now I'm married, and now how here I have kids, and now all of these kids are just growing up on social media without ever having a say. From the moment they're a kid to a toddler to, you know, the messes they make are all online. And we've already seen the fallout of this in the past few years with people having scholarships revoked based on status updates that they posted. We talked about octogenarian service providers and supporting aging populations, memory augmentation specialists. So what about human enhancement? What if, you know, we've seen, there was a study in the New England Journal of Medicine from, I think about 7 years ago, where while performing deep brain stimulation by being a millimeter or two off, they accidentally enhanced and gave their subject eidetic or photographic memory. So getting into the realm of human enhancement, we're already seeing this with the multi-billion-dollar supplement industry. Extension revivalists, my mind went to Jurassic Park here. And then second generation astronauts. So someone who said space janitor was spot on, because now space isn't simply about surviving and performing science and bringing that return to Earth, but space we're looking at as a place to stay and to live and to work and to perform business in. Okay, so then talking about the timeliness of issues and the relevance, this is issues that were maybe a little bit of a priority in 2010. We knew it was important, but we just didn't pay attention, and are kind of crisis level in this day and age. So whether we're talking about climate crisis, I don't think that's under any debate. Pandemic planning, hopefully we could someday build a time machine and send a letter of warning to 5 years ago. Social media well-being, which we just discussed, cryptocurrency management, and especially last year with the rise of Black Lives Matter in tackling systemic racism, gender inequity, and particularly LGBTQ rights in this era of recognizing how our understanding of gender identity is a little bit more fluid than we once thought. So I'm just going to give you as a bonus before we end out of this section, another approach to exponential and innovation mindsets. This isn't mine. This isn't mine. This is borrowed from Peter Diamandis. So he has a few books on the subject. One's called Abundance. And so he looks at developing mindsets. So asking those what if questions, saying, what if, you know, we didn't have to worry about scarcity on Earth? You know, using the example of how aluminum was once more valuable than gold because it was so rare until we learned how to actually extract and manufacture it. Longevity, asking that what if question, well, what if we didn't have to die? Applying exponential and emerging technologies to be able to achieve 1 and 2. And then also moonshot goals. So saying, okay, well, the day before something becomes a reality, it's a crazy idea. So what disruptive questions can we ask, whether it's asking how we can make a tricorder a reality? He's done that. He's created a competition around that through his X Prize Foundation, through making suborbital flight a reality. So he first launched the X Prize for this, that Virgin Galactic one, in the early 2000s. So the second to last question, or the second to last framework that I want to address, is environment. So the what we want to do. We want to practice, we want to be able to apply innovation, but we also want to facilitate the process for others. So the question is how? How do we do that? So one of the answers is through physical engineering. Physically engineer our workspaces to facilitate interaction. So the saying goes that Pixar is that to be able to access critical facilities like the restroom or the mailroom, you actually have to walk through the entire campus. So you have to interact with the computer engineers, as well as the animators, as well as the production guys. The idea is to increase those interactions. So think of a chemical reaction. And so you can either, you have your solute and you have your second solute and you're trying to get them to react. And then if you add a catalyst, like physically engineering your workspace, all of a sudden you're increasing the rate of reaction. Google has done this as well through its open workspace plan. So it's really interesting that there was a lot of hype about the value of this. And now we're also starting to see data that maybe there's unintended consequences related to increased distraction and decreased productivity around having that open workspace. The other part about engineering that innovation mindset is looking at the tools we have at our disposal. So this is one of the best possible times to wanting to be able to innovate, because there's so many tools related to being able to educate yourself, being able to fund yourself through Kickstarter and CrowdSpring, using massive online open courses like Udacity, Coursera, edX, learning to program through Raspberry Pi and Arduino, using tools that would have been prohibitively expensive in the past, and then broadcasting yourself through social media, YouTube, SoundCloud. So the last thing I want to talk about is experience. So this is actually a study, this is from Harvard Business Review, looking at 5 innovative people and then looking at what they did differently versus the what they call non-innovators. So they looked at people like Michael Dell, and they said, okay, well, they tend to make associations between non-like things. They ask questions, they ask those what if questions. They say, how can I make this better? What if this was better? They observe, and we'll talk about how we can apply that observation questioning at the end of this, experimenting, and then also networking. So there's the value of that teamwork and that cross-disciplinary interaction. And so it's not just these guys in the boardrooms, it's not all guys, it's not all men. So here's an example of people and using that experience. And so here is IDEO, one of the world's leading design firms. Their Silicon Valley office hired a 91-year-old designer. This was Barbara Knickerbocker Bethkind. And so the reason that she was hired is because she was designing and she was part of the audience they were designing for. So she lived in a nursing home, and they said, okay, we noticed that the folks who live in the nursing home are struggling with opening the pill bottles. So how do we create a pill bottle that you can easily open with your arthritic, knobbly, painful fingers that can also still be safe and child-proof, but still be usable for you? And then they applied the design model from prototyping to presenting to validating to iterating to prototyping further. At the other end of the age spectrum, here's someone who asked that what if question. Here he was 14 years old, Aryan Mishra, when he discovered an asteroid, simply by saying, okay, well, how do I get that experience? And what if it actually is a new asteroid that I'm discovering? And so the bottom line is to apply that mindset of applying that experiment is question, observe, experiment. All right, so we've talked about in this section, we've talked so far about what is innovation, why is it important, how do we apply it, and specifically using the framework of people, mindset, environment, and experience. So we've talked about a lot this session. Okay, so let's return to that what if scenario. So in the beginning of this, we started off with a thought experiment. How as a child, perhaps you could annihilate tumor particles, and all before breakfast on your day off from school, you've actually cured cancer in a brain tumor patient. So what else? And this was through the use of VR and AR. So what else can we do with these emerging technologies? What can we do with the world of digital twins and augmented reality? What happens when we have autonomous cars? How do we make use of that extra time? What does the second generation astronauts of the world look like? And then on the flip side of that, looking at our problem spaces, the most obvious one being COVID, how do we innovate around that? How do we engineer solutions to both keep ourselves safe in the era of COVID and, best case scenario, eradicate COVID altogether and get back to being in crowds, if you like being in a crowd. So here are some optional homework assignments that we have for next time. Designing your own Terminator scenario, maybe for COVID, saying, using emerging technologies, what is your opportunity scenario? Picking a sector, whether it's healthcare, education, transport, space, developing a future scenario for it. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a couple of classes' time. This is the homework assignment, the next 1.3, about how we start applying those questions, those what if questions. So this one's really simple. You take a notepad and a pen, and as you wander through your everyday life, whether it's at home, whether it's campus, just noting things, just observing. What is inefficient? Is the lighting, is the temperature heating inefficient? Is the flow of students as they move from one class to another, is it inefficient? So that's the first thing, observing, and then asking those questions. How can this be made better? And then how can I make this better? picking a novel emerging technology to tell the class about. There's so many of them, and the beauty of teaching this class over 11 years is that I'm still changing the slide deck every time and learning about new novel technologies. And then coming back to the slides that we talked about, they're very high level. So I'd like to hear what your 10 problems that you think did not exist 10 years ago and that will exist in 10 years. And then additional questions in additions to the ones we covered is, what would the ideal use case be for this technology? What would be the next disruptive force to today's disruptive forces, whether it's social media, things like metaverse is one big bet for that, to autonomous cars, to flying drones. How do we disrupt that? And then what is the future of X technology? So specific discussion questions, if you are going to continue the discussion beyond this class, is I know there's computer scientists, future physicians, biomedical engineers. What are 3 big challenges to overcome? What's the disruptive force to cryptocurrency? What are emerging forms of cryptocurrency, or sorry, currency? Your definition of big problems and crises may be different from mine. So what are some of the groundest challenges we face? And what are some of the craziest feats that we have yet to achieve, whether it's faster than light travel, time travel? What are emerging technologies that I've not covered in this talk that we may be able to leverage? And then what are trends in medicine that we haven't covered yet today? So that was a lot for me. Oftentimes we have a lot of questions in this class. It's usually a curious group. And then looking ahead to next time, we're going to be talking about space medicine, constraints of the spaceflight environment, emerging technologies that will get us there. So thank you very much for your attention. I invite your questions. I will type my email into the chat because I see it's really, really tiny there. So AR/VR social space managers, I like it. Okay, and here's my email address if you guys need it.
So if you want to unshare, then we'll see the faces of the students bigger.
Sure. Stop share. Done.
There we go. Okay.
Welcome back. Welcome back. Thanks for everyone for sticking around.
So there's a new thing you can do on Zoom. Let me just try it. This is the so-called immersive view. And so you can, it just something different.
What? Oh, wow. Cool.
Yeah. And there's a privacy thing, you see the names there, but on the recording, none of the names are there. So the recording's a little bit more anonymous than this. There are multiple versions. Let me show you some of the others. And the funny thing is, the numbers go up to 25, and there are 25 students associated with the course. So it's like they did this specifically for us, So here's some other versions of this. Let's see here. Yeah. So that's just another. Yeah, there are several of them, and if you're in a more intimate setting, they also have this for like 2 people, 4 people, and so on. Yeah. So
very, very interesting.
How about that? Okay.
That's evolved.
So any questions? So what you end up with, the one person in the room looks like a Lilliputian, right? Very, very small, the guy in the center. But he's actually just as important as the other normal sized people. So anyway, yeah.
Great. So here's a discussion point for the class. Maybe we can use the last 10 minutes for discussion. So what is an example of an inefficiency in your everyday life? You kind of take for granted because you accepted it so far, but it doesn't happen now that you've been through today's session. Anything that bothers you?
So I guess if I can go, for me, I get cold very easily in certain environments. So when I'm at my house, in my room with the sun, and I can control the temperature, it's fine. But some days like at school, just because I guess they try to make the temperature fit for everyone. But for me, because I'm so sensitive to the cold, I get chilly. So that's one thing.
And sorry, was that Talani who said that, or who
Yeah,
said that?
Talani.
Yeah. So that's really interesting that you mentioned that, because firstly, I will confess that I've had a blanket and a heater going the entire time here. And this actually is a really interesting point about design and gender inequity. So those of you who pay attention to, well, design and the spaceflight world, famously the first all-female spacewalk was to happen 2019, I think. And then it was delayed because of a spacesuit fitting issue. It turned out to be that they hadn't prepared the part for that particular astronaut. But then we got into the world of design, and oftentimes we've heard, women don't belong on the battlefield. Women don't fit into this equipment, but it's because the design hasn't been engineered for them, whether it's the shoulder parts of a spacesuit or the Kevlar contour of body armor, because it doesn't take into account female anatomy. So extending that to physiology, it's interesting. They've actually done studies on why women are cold. It's not that women are cold, it's that the ideal average body office temperature of an office is engineered for the average size male. So if you have a higher body mass index, whether you're male or female, you're going to have added insulation, you're going to be too hot. If you're female, because of your lower basal metabolic rate, you're actually going to run colder. And so it's not that women are cold, it's they're cold at a temperature that hasn't been designed for them. So it's very interesting with the emerging research around gender specific design.
So I've been sharing my office with students for a long time, and the temperature is very easily moderated, and it's amazing how different students choose a very different ideal temperature. And I've just learned to live with it. When I'm sharing with somebody else, I'm prepared to take my jacket off, whatever, rather than me, dictating for them what the office temperature needs to be.
Yeah, I agree. My layers are my innovative solution as well, Kim. So you're preaching to the choir as well.
Right.
Yeah. Any further insights, questions, comments, concerns? I see a raised hand. Who is that? I can't quite identify. But
That's me. Speaking of inefficiencies, something that I've kind of thought of for a while, looking at my friends and my colleagues, is the amount of time that's wasted on menial tasks just to acquire something like the money necessary to live, just to keep a shelter over your head or to keep yourself fed. Whereas that energy and that time could be put towards kind of pursuits that the person would actually want to do.
yeah, absolutely. And it's really interesting once you start looking for inefficiency, it's visible at every turn. And so, for example, in the era of COVID, when everything's being presented virtually, it's crazy how much time we took for granted that would just go to transportation. So that would come to physically parking on campus, walking to campus, setting up, leaving, the office, 45 minutes early to be able to make it, or for doing an in-person talk, flying all the way to a different study. And now here you just turn on your computer and you're there. And it's a really relevant point about finances as well as the hidden costs that come with daily cost of living. So worthy of finding a solution too.
Yeah, there's a whole sort of ethos about handshaking and hugs and how to do handshaking and hugs. And if you did it wrong, you were a social outcast. Now all that's done. Nobody's doing.
I just try to avoid it altogether now in the
Yeah.
post-pandemic world,
Yeah.
or currently still in pandemic world.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, any further insights at all from anyone?
I think women's pockets should be larger. That's another thing about gender-based design, I suppose. A lot of things are designed specifically for a woman, except they're basically the same as they are for men, except more expensive, like razors and stuff like that.
Yes.
But things that actually would be useful to have, like pockets, are for some reason smaller and not able to be used. So yeah, I feel like things like that.
Yeah, Chin, that's a really excellent point, and it's perfectly in line with what I mean when we say, you know, we've dealt with inefficiency or inconvenience for so long because we accepted it as a status quo until there's actually a term for that, and you probably already know it. It's called the pink tax, and it's simply the cost of being a woman, right? So that includes everything from paying extra for feminine health menstrual products to, as you say, women's razors are no different from a Chic Quattro, but apparently, you know, they're just that more expensive. And, you know, extending that to other sectors, I like to say the 3 M's. So medicine, marriage, motherhood, you just add those words and suddenly things are, you know, an order of magnitude more expensive. The same drill you use for brain surgery is the same drill you use at home hardware, but it's tens of thousands of dollars because of that M word. So it's another way of saying, well, how could this be done differently? How can we bring the costs down? All right, folks. Well, that's it from me. I fully look forward. I think I'm speaking to you next Tuesday, if I have that right. All right. Yeah, on the 1st. So we'll be talking about space medicine then. And if you have any questions in the meantime, I look forward to hearing them. If you end up doing the homework assignment, I really look forward to seeing what you come up with. So enjoy the rest of your afternoons. We will see you Tuesday.
Great. Sounds good.
Bye.
Bye-bye now.